Hi, my name's Odessa. 5 years ago, my family didn't just shame me, they erased me. They lied. They laughed. They buried me in silence. And when they thought I'd never rise again, they sent me an invitation, expecting me to smile. But the thing about being buried alive is, you learn to dig your way out, and you don't come back empty-handed. Tonight, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to rewrite the story they tried to end. Before we dive in, tell me, if your family erased your name, would you forgive or would you fight? It had been one of those grinding court days that left the city air tasting like dust and paper. As I pushed open the door to my apartment in downtown Charleston, the soft golden hour light spilled across the hardwood floors, almost making the place look warmer than it felt. I kicked off my pumps, letting them thud against the wall, and dropped my briefcase on the old oak table, the mail sliding off in a messy fan, bills, junk, a coupon for a seafood place I'd never try, and then it caught my eye. A heavy envelope, thick and cream-colored, with the Marin family crest embossed in gold. My fingers hesitated midair. The world seemed to narrow down to the space between my hand and that envelope. My chest tightened like an invisible hand was squeezing it. I hadn't seen that crest since the night I walked away, 5 years ago. After Jameson stood in front of our entire extended family and raised a glass to my downfall, I wiped my hands on my skirt, as if they were dirty, and finally reached for the envelope. It was absurdly formal, gold wax seal, the kind you'd expect from a royal summons, not from a family that had treated you like a pariah. I traced the curve of my name on the front, Odessa Marin, then slowly slid my letter opener under the seal. The scent of expensive stationery and old memories hit me at the same time. Inside, a wedding invitation, so ornate it was almost vulgar. You are cordially invited to the marriage of Jameson Marin and Catherine Walsh. My stomach flipped. Jameson, the golden boy. The obedient son, the future of the Marine medical dynasty, at least in their eyes. And Catherine Walsh, the name didn't ring a single bell. Probably another curated blonde debutante to polish the Marin image. I set the invitation down with care, as if it might explode. Something else slipped out of the envelope, a plain piece of lined paper, no seal. No pomp, my mother's handwriting, shaky and urgent. Please come. I miss you. They don't know I'm writing you. Mom. I stared at it, my breath catching. The same mother who had sat there, silent, the night Jameson raised his glass and called me a disgrace. The same mother who hadn't lifted a finger when I packed my bags in front of the whole family and walked out into the cold. And now, this, a secret plea, hidden like contraband. For a second, the room blurred around me. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself, the cool marble biting into my palms. Without thinking, my hand went to the silver necklace around my neck, the tiny gavel charm my grandfather gave me the day I passed the bar exam. He was the only one who had looked at me and said, "You're enough, Odessa, just as you are." I pressed the charm to my lips, for courage, or maybe to keep from breaking apart. Memories slammed into me like a fist. Thanksgiving, 5 years ago. Jameson, a few glasses deep, clinking his wine goblet against Dad's Scotch glass, his voice loud enough to slice through the polite murmuring of cousins and aunts. "She thinks she's too good for us now," he'd said, laughing meanly, trading stethoscopes for subpoenas, trading blood for strangers' gratitude. What a damn disgrace. The laughter, the coughs, the awkward scraping of silverware, and Mom, her eyes watery, but her mouth clamped shut. Dad, he didn't even meet my gaze. I stood there. Then, 29 years old. Humiliated like a schoolgirl called out in assembly. No defense. No lifeline, just silence. That was the night I packed my car with everything that would fit and drove away without looking back. Until now, I blinked hard. Snapping myself back to the present, the invitation sat there, gleaming smugly under my kitchen light, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Was this some desperate attempt to pretend none of it had happened? A polished PR move to drag the prodigal daughter back into the family photos? Or worse, a trap designed to humiliate me all over again? The RSVP card stared up at me, blank, expectant. God, a part of me wanted to rip the thing up, toss it in the trash where it belonged. Another part, the part that still ached on Christmas mornings, the part that still wondered if they missed me, wanted to show up, just once. Not for them, for me, because maybe it was time to stop letting their silence define my worth. My phone buzzed on the counter. Breaking the heavy silence, I snatched it up, thumbing over to Maya's contact, my anchor, my North Star through every ugly chapter of the story. I typed the words before I could second-guess myself. Maya, should I walk back into the lion's den? I hovered a second, then hit send. The city hummed around me. The distant wail of a siren, the low bass of a passing car, life moving on. I slipped the note back into the envelope, tucked it into my briefcase, and closed my eyes. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The Marin family had no idea who they were inviting back. The question lingered in my mind like smoke curling against a cold window. Should I walk back into the lion's den? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Instead, I walked across the room and pulled open the cabinet above the sink. My hand automatically found the bottle of whiskey tucked behind a box of herbal tea I never touched. I poured 2 fingers into a glass, no ice, and stood there, staring at the RSVP card lying on the kitchen table like it had the power to rearrange my life. I took a slow sip, letting the burn bloom in my chest. It wasn't enough to drown the memories clawing their way up. It was Thanksgiving, 5 years ago. I could smell the roasted turkey, the expensive wine, the cloying scent of my mother's perfume mixed with candles that were just a little too sweet. The Marin family estate had been packed, as always, with every cousin, distant aunt, and business associate crammed into the grand dining hall like the set of some fake glossy ad for American family values. Back then, I was still new to the courtroom, carrying student loan debt like a second skin. I worked as a public defender, the least glamorous path anyone in my family could imagine. I remember showing up late that day, fresh from an emergency arraignment, my jacket still creased, my shoes scuffed from running across courthouse parking lots. Jameson caught sight of me as I slipped into my seat at the far end of the table. His eyes glittered with the kind of mischief that always ended badly. For someone else, the night wore on. Toast started. First Dad, then Uncle Mark, then a few others raising glasses to new jobs, new babies, new houses in the right zip codes. And then Jameson stood. Some of us, he said, voice rich and oily, choose to serve the community, his eyes locked onto mine, a wicked smile creeping up. Others choose to shame the family legacy. There was a smattering of awkward chuckles around the room. Some family friends raised their eyebrows but said nothing. I sat there, frozen, the turkey on my plate growing cold. Mom clutched her wine glass tighter. Dad looked at the centerpiece like it had suddenly become fascinating. Nobody said a word in my defense. The kind of silence that screams. I remembered folding my napkin slowly, methodically, placing it on my plate, and rising from my chair. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even asked where I was going. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so hard it took 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. I never attended another family event after that. And not once did anyone call to ask why. I drained the whiskey glass in one long pull and set it down harder than necessary. The sound sharp in the quiet apartment. A part of me wanted to believe things could be different now, that maybe the note from Mom meant there was a crack in the stone wall they'd built between us. But another part, The smarter part knew better. I glanced at the RSVP card again, then reached for my laptop. If I was going to walk into this wedding, I needed to know exactly who Catherine Walsh was. It didn't take long. Public records, law firm bios, court transcripts. Catherine Walsh wasn't just some ornamental bride plucked from high society. She was a damn good lawyer, specializing in housing rights, fighting for tenants against greedy landlords and corrupt housing authorities. I scrolled further down and froze. 8 months ago, a case in my courtroom. It clicked. Catherine had been the young attorney standing in front of me, defending a group of tenants against a predatory developer. She'd been fiery, articulate, relentless, and she'd won. Back then, I hadn't connected her to Jameson. There'd been no hint, no flicker of recognition, no fake smiles, no smug nods, just a woman fighting for what was right, irony twisted in my gut like a dull blade. Jameson, who had once stood up and humiliated me for shaming the family legacy, was marrying a probably idolized, the very judge he had disowned. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, heart pounding against my ribs. Maybe fate had a sense of humor after all. The clock on the wall ticked forward into the night, marking time like a slow drumbeat. I stared at the RSVP card. This time, my hands didn't shake. I grabbed a pen from the counter, took a breath, and in one clean, deliberate motion wrote, "I'll be there." I folded the card neatly, slid it back into the return envelope, and pressed the seal shut. No ceremony, no second guessing. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one, but not the show they were expecting. The glass of whiskey sat forgotten on the counter as I turned off the lights and headed toward my bedroom. The night air through the cracked window smelled like rain and possibility. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet fire caught. I slipped the sealed RSVP card into the nearest mailbox the next morning, standing there longer than necessary as the metal door clanged shut behind it. There was something final about the sound, like slamming a gate on the past and cracking another one open toward whatever waited ahead. Charleston was wrapped in a cloudy hush, the kind that pressed low against the skin, threatening rain but never quite delivering. I didn't go straight back to the courthouse. Instead, I turned left at the main intersection, letting instinct steer me through streets I hadn't walked in years. The family cemetery lay a few miles outside the city center, tucked behind an iron fence lined with aging oaks that whispered against one another in the breeze. The moment I pulled into the gravel lot, my chest tightened, old grief stirring like sediment at the bottom of a glass. I grabbed the bouquet of fresh lilies from the passenger seat, smoothing the crinkled paper around their stems, and made my way up the slight hill toward the far corner. There, under a weather-worn marble headstone, was the only man who had ever seen me for who I was, without conditions, without bargaining chips, Judge Elias Marin, Grandpa. I knelt carefully, brushing away a few stray leaves, and set the flowers at the base of his stone. The engraving had started to fade, but his words, the ones he lived by, remained burned into my memory. Justice without fear. Integrity without compromise. I sat back on my heels, letting the silence settle around me. Then, from the inside pocket of my jacket, I pulled out the small, yellowed envelope I'd carried with me for years, but had never opened. It had been the last thing he handed me before cancer stole the strength from his once commanding voice. When you need it most, he'd said, "Well, if not now, then when I slid my finger under the brittle seal, unfolding the single sheet inside." His handwriting trembled, but strong. Real power isn't loud, Ellie. It's in standing tall without needing to push others down. You won't always be their favorite. You weren't born to be. You were born to outgrow them. I stared at the letter until the words blurred, a knot tightening in my throat. All these years, I had tried to prove myself, to explain myself, to belong somewhere that never truly wanted me, and he had known. He had known I would outgrow them long before I even understood what that meant. Tucking the letter back into the envelope, I pressed my hand over the small silver gavel hanging at my neck, the last physical piece of him I had, not for show, not for them, for me. The first few drops of rain kissed the back of my hand, soft as a benediction. I stood, brushed the dampness from my skirt, and made my way back to my car, the letter tucked safely into my briefcase. By the time I reached the courthouse that afternoon, the clouds had broken into a steady, misting drizzle. I made my way up the marble steps, nodding to the bailiffs and clerks who barely looked up from their screens. The familiarity of it grounded me, until I heard my name carried on a whisper from around the corner. Judge Marin, yeah. She's the one. Catherine Walsh said it herself. Half the cases she wins now are because she studied Judge Marin's rulings inside and out. I slowed my steps, pretending to skim the docket in my hand. Catherine Walsh, my brother's fiancée, learning from me. Not from Jameson, not from my parents' so-called dynasty, but from the disgrace they'd tried to erase. It was almost laughable. I kept walking, keeping my face neutral. But inside, something shifted, something hardened. All their careful architecture, the perfect family image, the chosen heirs, the golden narratives, built on the very foundation they had tried to tear down. A low, grim smile pulled at the corners of my mouth as I stepped into my chambers and closed the door behind me. They wrote me off, pretended I didn't exist, but they were about to remember me the hard way. The storm outside thickened, rattling the windows as if it, too, was preparing for something bigger, and for the first time in years, I felt steady, unshakable. The last echo of my grandfather's words still lingered in my mind as I locked my office and stepped into the thick Charleston evening. The humid air clung to my skin, a stubborn reminder that spring in this city always came with a price. Clouds hung low, heavy with the threat of rain that hadn't quite broken yet. I slipped the RSVP envelope into the mail slot at the end of the block and pulled my coat tighter around me, feeling the weight of a future I hadn't asked for but would face head-on. I was halfway home when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket, breaking the heavy silence of my car. The screen flashed an unknown number, and for a moment, my thumb hovered above the decline button. Logic urged me to ignore it. My heart, traitorous as ever, pressed. Answer, Odessa. My mother's voice filtered through, tentative and strained, like a violin string pulled too tight. I stared out at the windshield, watching the droplets of mist gather, then slip away. Mom, I said, my voice even. I was hoping. She began, faltering. Would you have dinner with me? Just the two of us. Before the wedding, the request twisted something deep in my chest. Part of me, the hard-won part, wanted to say no, to protect the walls I'd spent years rebuilding. But there was another part, raw and unhealed, that still remembered a time when her voice meant safety, not betrayal. After a long beat, I said, all right, where's Chez Rousseau? She said quickly, almost too quickly. Of course, the restaurant where appearances were a second religion. I'll be there, I replied, already regretting it as I ended the call. The next evening, twilight draped itself across the city in muted purples and grays. I drove with the windows cracked open, letting the damp air numb the war raging inside me. As I pulled into the tight parking lot behind Chez Rousseau, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, composed, distant, a woman who had learned not to flinch first. Inside, the restaurant was unchanged. White tablecloths stretched taut across polished wood tables. Waiters in starched aprons moved like ghosts between candlelit conversations. I spotted her immediately. sitting alone at a corner table by the window, a glass of untouched wine trembling in her hand. I crossed the floor with measured steps, heels clicking softly on the parquet. She stood halfway when she saw me, smile brittle around the edges. "Odessa," she said, her voice uncertain. "Mom," I answered. Sliding into the chair across from her, the server approached, and we ordered, her a salad she would pick at, me a black coffee I didn't need. Small talk filled the space between us like sawdust, the weather, the wedding preparations, how the city's skyline was changing. None of it mattered. None of it touched the gaping void between us. Our plates arrived. The food sat untouched. It wasn't until the coffee cooled in front of me that she spoke, setting her fork down with a soft clink. "I owe you an apology," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, waiting. "Jameson." She paused, gathering herself. "He told everyone you had a breakdown, that you left because you couldn't handle the pressure." The words didn't surprise me, but hearing them out loud scraped something raw. She twisted her napkin until the fabric strained. "He said it to Catherine, to everyone. And Her voice broke. I didn't stop him. I thought if we didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away." I stared at her for a long moment, the hum of the restaurant fading into the background. "You didn't protect me," I said, my voice low but steady. "You let them bury me." Tears pooled in her eyes, but I felt nothing, not rage, not sadness, only the cold clarity of a wound too old to bleed. She reached into her purse with trembling fingers and slid a small velvet box across the table. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside, resting against dark velvet, was the pendant my grandfather had promised me after I passed the bar exam, Lady Justice. Blindfolded, her scales perfectly balanced. Jameson had kept it all these years. While they erased me from their perfect picture, "It's yours," she whispered. "It always was." I closed the box and slipped it into the inside pocket of my blazer. Over my heart, no thank you. No forgiveness. Some things couldn't be bought back with heirlooms and late apologies. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping lightly against the floor. She flinched at the sound. "They buried me once," I said quietly, standing tall. "This time I'm digging myself out, and I'm bringing the truth with me." Her lips parted as if to speak, but I was already moving. I crossed the restaurant floor without looking back, the pendant a solid weight against my chest. Outside, the mist had thickened into a light rain, but the air smelled cleaner now, lighter, as if the city itself had exhaled something old and bitter. I walked toward the streetlights, each step steady, each breath deeper than the last. The rain from the night before had dried into a hazy mist that clung stubbornly to the morning air. I stood in front of my closet, weighing my options. It wasn't just about getting dressed. It was about armor, choosing a version of myself to present to the people who thought they had written me out of the family script. After a moment, I settled on a simple black sheath dress, structured but not severe, and a pair of low-heeled pumps, polished but unassuming. I looped the silver Lady Justice pendant around my neck, letting it rest just below my collarbone, a quiet reminder, a silent weapon. On the drive to the Marin estate, Charleston blurred by, the pastel row houses, the smell of salt in the air, the low hum of tourists beginning to trickle into the historic district. I barely noticed. My mind was locked in a slow, gathering rhythm, the way a storm coils before it strikes. By the time I pulled into the long, circular driveway, several cars were already there, expensive, gleaming, loud in the way only old money could afford to be. I cut the engine, took a long breath, and stepped out. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature in the room seemed to shift. Polite smiles, tight hugs, air kisses that never touched skin. The kind of welcome reserved for strangers who remind you of something you'd rather forget. I handed my coat to a young server in a starched white jacket and moved through the entryway. Past the familiar family portraits lining the hall, Jameson as a baby, Jameson at college graduation, Jameson cutting the ribbon on the new Marine pediatric wing. My absence was conspicuous, a hollow space nobody ever acknowledged. I found myself drifting toward the side parlor where a few of my cousins had gathered, their voices carried, buoyed by too much champagne and the giddy cruelty that always seemed to seep into Marin's celebrations. "She thinks she's somebody now," one of them snickered. "Just because she's got a desk and a robe," another laughed. An ugly nasal sound. "Yeah, she's just playing dress-up, real success that's in the blood." I stood frozen for a moment, the words sliding over me like sleet. Sharp, icy, wounding, but they didn't pierce the way they once would have. No, this time, they sharpened something inside me instead, tempered it. I turned on my heel without acknowledging them, my spine straight, my heels clicking decisively against the marble floor. The gathering swelled toward the main ballroom, where a long, gleaming table groaned under the weight of hors d'oeuvres and floral arrangements so garish they looked almost funereal. The champagne was flowing freely, lubricating old gossip and new resentments. I drifted toward the edge of the crowd, sipping water from a cut-glass tumbler. My eyes scanning the room without really seeing it, I spotted Jameson holding court near the fireplace. Charming a circle of well-dressed admirers, Catherine stood a few feet away, laughing at something he said, though her eyes darted nervously toward me now and then. Someone tapped a fork against a champagne glass. The room quieted. Jameson raised his glass. That same practiced smile stretched across his face, the one he wore at fundraisers and board meetings. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming," he began, his voice warm and magnanimous. "It means the world to have our family, those who've carried the Marine name with pride, and our dear friends here tonight." Polite laughter rippled through the room, and of course, he continued, his gaze sweeping the room, pausing ever so briefly on me. "We're grateful for all kinds of success stories. Even those who think a black robe and a desk make up for, well, a real legacy." Another ripple of laughter. Sharper this time. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass until the cold bit into my skin. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. If Jameson was hoping for a reaction, he wouldn't get it. Not yet. I let the laughter pass over me, around me, like a tide that could no longer pull me under. Instead, I raised my glass silently. Not in toast, not in surrender, but as a promise to myself. Never again. Never again would I let them diminish me. Never again would I swallow my truth for their comfort. Never again would I stand silently while they rewrote the story of who I was. The pendant around my neck felt warm against my skin, its weight anchoring me. The rest of the evening blurred, empty conversations, forced laughter, the clatter of glasses and silverware. But I was somewhere else entirely, already charting the course of what would come next, because the reckoning had already begun, and this time, they wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The clink of champagne glasses still echoed faintly in my ears as I stepped onto the back veranda of the Marin estate, where the night air carried the salty bite of the harbor. I needed space. Needed a moment to breathe away from the tight smiles and thinly veiled contempt inside. I wasn't alone for long. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Only one person carried that particular brand of entitlement like a second skin, Jameson. He leaned casually against the railing beside me, his profile bathed in the amber glow from the terrace lights. Quite the turnout. "Huh?" he drawled, swirling the last dregs of his whiskey. I said nothing. keeping my gaze on the dark water beyond the hedges. "You've made quite a splash yourself," he continued, mock admiration threading through his words. "Showing up all righteous, draped in that little pendant like it means something. Still," I stayed silent. It wasn't until he chuckled, low and condescending, that I turned to him, my voice steady, precise. "One more public lie about me. Jameson," I said, "and I won't stay quiet." He froze mid-sip, lowering his glass slowly. For a beat, the only sound was the whisper of wind through the palm trees. Then, he smirked. The familiar smug tilt of his mouth I'd known since childhood. "You wouldn't dare," he said, voice dripping with confidence. "You throw a fit, and you look petty. You stay quiet, and you look polished. Either way, I win." I let the silence stretch between us, let him marinate in his own arrogance. Then I turned and walked away, not needing to say another word, because I already knew the truth. By the time the sun dipped low the next evening, casting long orange streaks across the Charleston skyline, I was pulling into the grand banquet hall where the rehearsal dinner was being held. The place was almost absurd in its opulence. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors polished to mirror brightness, centerpieces so large they blocked half the table conversations. The Marins never did anything halfway. Inside, the crowd had thickened. Relatives, family friends, business associates, everyone decked out in their finest, buzzing with shallow excitement. I entered quietly, head high, the pendant at my throat catching the light. Eyes followed me, as they always did, some warm, most wary. A few outright hostile behind polite smiles. I spotted Jameson across the room, his arm looped possessively around Catherine's waist, grinning like the king of a crumbling castle. He caught my gaze for a split second and winked. It was then that I knew. I found my assigned seat at one of the long banquet tables, tucked between distant cousins I barely recognized. A folded program card sat neatly on each plate, listing the evening's schedule. I picked mine up and froze. The front was innocuous enough. "Welcome to the rehearsal dinner of Jameson Marin and Catherine Walsh." But when I opened it to the back, where the family accolades were printed, "A tradition at Marin events," my name was conspicuously absent. It wasn't an accident. Aunt Margaret's 2-year stint as a board member of a minor hospital wing was listed. Cousin Philip's second-place finish in a statewide rowing competition was printed in bold. Even great-uncle Charles' lifetime achievement in accounting earned a mention. But me, Odessa Marin, Harvard Law graduate, state-appointed judge at 35 erased. The paper trembled slightly between my fingers. Not from anger, but from the sheer force it took to remain composed. Across the room, Jameson lifted his glass toward me in a mock toast, a grin curving his mouth. The crowd laughed and chattered around me. Oblivious, sometimes. What breaks us isn't the betrayal itself, but the silence that follows it. The years I spent away from my family weren't quiet. They were loud with doubt, grief, rage, and longing. But in that space, I found something they never expected me to find myself. This story isn't about revenge. It's about recognition, about no longer shrinking for people who only see you when it benefits them, about walking into rooms where they tried to erase you and standing taller because of it. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion, and justice doesn't always come from courtrooms. Sometimes it's just a daughter holding her ground, a sister refusing to bow, a woman walking away without looking back. To anyone who's ever been cut out of the picture, your story isn't over. You're not lost. You were never disposable. So now I want to hear from you. If they erased your name, would you go back? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. Let's heal. Let's remind each other that we are not alone in these stories. Thank you for being here, for listening, for seeing Odessa. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, Stay strong and stay you.